I met a soldier who, in the early days of the pandemic, uh, Canadian military has something called Operation Laser. It's its contingency plan for pandemics. And under Operation Laser in the GTA, the military was deployed to some long-term care within the GTA. And I met one of the soldiers that he's a reserve soldier, but he volunteered to go in and assist in the long-term care. He's not a medical person, I have to say that, but he was there to, assist. He was, put on a military contract for full-time employment to go in and help out in the long-term care. And it was interesting to me because I spoke to him shortly after it. And he said, those people in the homes were not dying of COVID. They were dying of dehydration.
Agreed.
And, you know, I had also been told that in some cases, I want to be careful about this because I don't want to make accusations that are unfounded, but this is, personal accounts that people had told me of what they had seen, that sometimes the patients would get very agitated because they're not getting fed properly, they're dehydrated, there's not enough staff to go around, there's not enough people to help. So the patients would get agitated, and then at some point they would be strapped to the bed and given a sedative to calm them down. These are stories I've been told, and I want to be careful because, I don't want to make accusations. But does that sound like something that potentially could happen, in your opinion, because of the understaffing that the people working in long-term care had to deal with? Does that sound like something that potentially could have happened?
Now, I did not witness that at all, and I have really not seen people be restrained unless there's a doctor's order for a restraint. And really, in Ontario, in long-term care homes, we have not used physical restraints for many, many, many years. It just really agitates people further. It causes injury. It causes dehydration, delirium. It's not something we do. And I guess I would be very surprised to see that. I did not see that in our area here at all. And I would be shocked if that happened. Medicating, so there's physical restraints and there are chemical restraints. So chemical restraints are more the use of medications, right? Psychotropic
Right.
medications. And I would suspect that that may have happened a little more often, but sometimes those are necessary if someone has a delirium, if someone's dangerously agitated, harming themselves, harming others. There are criteria for use for those kinds of medications. So I would
Okay.
say I did not witness what you were told there. I did not see that.
Right. Okay. But certainly the dehydration.
I saw that with my own eyes when I was just redeployed for one day into a long-term care home. And up until that point, I was actually pretty convinced that there was a pandemic and that we all needed to be careful and that people were actually dying of COVID, not with COVID. After that experience, my eyes were fully wide open. I teach on delirium, dehydration. I teach on many, many different things. And it became very evident to me that these people did not die from COVID. They may have died with COVID, but they died of
Right.
dehydration and
Right.
delirium. So,
Okay. And that's an important thing because I don't know if you're familiar with retired Lieutenant Colonel David Redmond. He was the head of Emergency Management Alberta, and he had very, very quickly. He recently testified at the National Citizens Inquiry in Red
I've been
Deer.
following.
His testimony, yeah, his testimony was unbelievable. I've done some correspondence with him. He has shared his material with me in the past, especially during the time that I was campaigning, because I was talking about another organization called Emergency Management Ontario. And he spent a lot of time actually talking about in the early days what happened, but in particular, long-term care. And based on the numbers that he was talking about, it was above 85% of the fatalities in from COVID for people that died with COVID, not necessarily of COVID, because he had looked at the numbers and realized that, you know, people that were dying had 4 or more comorbidities. And above 85% of the casualties of people who either died of or with COVID, plus 85+% of them were in long-term care. And he rightly noticed, because the data has been supported by this, he rightly noticed that children had no risk of dying from COVID.
Agreed.
And so this was an illness that was affecting predominantly our seniors in long-term care. And he was advocating to say, you know, we should be basically putting a ring of steel around our long-term care and dedicating all of our resources to protect the most vulnerable in long-term care, which meant, you know, in Ontario kind of got this right. They deployed the military into some of the long-term care. But this was the point that I was trying to make, was that in the province of Ontario, what they did is they completely hampered the ability of long-term care staff to take care of the patients by not allowing the volunteers to get in there and help out, especially if the volunteers were, the volunteers could have been reassessed as being in risk zones. But very, very early on in the pandemic, it was widely known who this disease was affecting. We knew this within, I think, the first 3 months, who was most affected by the pandemic. We knew the age groups, and it was very clear. And yet, you know, it still took over a month for the military to get involved, and that comes from, you know, I understand the mechanisms to trigger the military to get involved. But, you know, it seems to me that the demographic in society who was the most vulnerable was the most neglected. And we put all of our efforts into the demographics of society that were at virtually no risk at all. If you like what you're seeing and hearing on our Meet Me in the Middle podcast, we want to know about it. My team and I strive to provide compelling content that is of most interest to you. So please interact with me on social media. Let us know what you like, what riles you up, and what makes you feel hopeful during these crazy times. Join my Twitter feed and follow my Facebook and Instagram pages when you visit. I also send a Freedom Updates newsletter right to your inbox with podcast details. Sometimes we even give things away, so sign up on my website. Please hit the subscribe button on both YouTube and Rumble. Be sure to sign up for notifications so you don't miss an episode, and forward this video to a like-minded friend. We're grateful to every one of you for joining us on this freedom journey. We've got a lot more planned, so tune in.